Okay, to those just joining us on the recorded version, welcome to week 15 U.S. History Seminar. We just finished watching that CNN 10 video, so if you are watching this after the fact, you should make sure to click on that link in the course and watch that video and take the quiz that is below that. And that was a lovely kitty that I saw on Anthony's video there for a second. So anyway, we are getting underway here. So let me do the screen share business. All right. Can everybody see that? I don't have my green border.
Yes.
All right, good. Sorry, in the government seminar, they watched the first minute or so of the CNN 10 video. They were just looking at my desktop. So I'm a little bit paranoid now. Okay, so week 15 announcements. The Unit 3 test, the last call on that was last night. Just a quick note, and I know we've talked about this before. A number of folks decided to wait until the absolute last minute to turn that in, to do that. And there were some problems. And I will tell you, Wednesdays are turning into a kind of busy day for me in terms of stuff that I have going at night. Actually, they usually are. The pandemic had lessened that because usually it's the night that I direct my church choir. But I hadn't been doing that because of the pandemic. They don't really want a bunch of older people in a room singing at each other. That seems like a bad idea. So I had sort of had Wednesdays a bit more open, but the last couple of Wednesdays I've had meetings and stuff for teaching and for union business and whatnot. And so like last night, I was not available in the time leading up to the end of that grace period. So if you wait until the last minute on stuff and then you have problems, I may not be available to assist you with those problems at the end. I mean, the fact that the grace period ends at 8 p.m. is just kind of a nicety, but really, you don't want to wait till the last minute on stuff. It will eventually bite you in the butt. May not have yet, and maybe you get lucky, maybe it won't, but I will say more often than not, people end up, I mean, I get emails, oh, I was 5 minutes late. Can I still turn it in? No, you can't. I don't grant additional time. Past the grace period is the additional time that I grant. Hi. Oh, okay. I'm in the middle of a seminar, so. All right. Sorry, I had a visitor at my door, which is rare. So anyway, just be aware that waiting around is not the best policy, really. Try and conform to that initial due date. That way, if there is a problem, we can fix it easily. Whereas if you wait and then you have a problem on Wednesday, it's so much harder for me to fix it. Unit 4 reading guide is due January 8th. I strongly urge you to get as much of it done before the break as you can. That way you don't have it hanging over your head all during the break and you go, oh, I should be working on this and I'm not, and you feel guilty about it. Don't let that happen. Get it done, this week and next week. Get it plowed out. I should have I have my mother actually reading the next chapter in the textbook for us, and I'm hoping that I have that tomorrow to post for you. So anyway, that is forthcoming. Make sure to do the discussion forum. Remember, those are 15 points a week. And so many people oh, I'm not going to do that. You're only hurting you. You're not hurting me by not participating in the discussion forum. And that's really true with all of this. If you choose not to do stuff, you're hurting you. It's not like I look at that, oh, they're so mean to me, I'm going to not give assignments because they don't do it. Nope. I just get to put zeros in the grade book. It hurts me not one bit. It hurts you. It hurts your understanding. It hurts your grade. Don't do that to yourself. That's a self-harming act. Week 15 seminar work. Get it done. Do it. Remember, the news quiz is 5 points of the 20-point grade. The number of people that do the news quiz and don't do the journal floors me. And I had somebody contact me maybe a week ago, and they, shouldn't I have gotten, 10 out of 20? I did the news quiz. No, the news quiz was 5 points. The journal's 15. So, I mean, if somebody's holding a gun to your head and saying you have to skip one, dear goodness, skip the quiz. Don't skip either one of them because they're easy. They're both easy. I mean, really, they're the easiest points you can get in this class. I mean, the news quiz is literally, were you paying any kind of attention? You should get at least 4 out of 5. And the seminar journal, good gravy. The question I ask is always super easy and only requires that you have paid a moderate level of attention to what we talked about. But remember, I do pull essay questions for the test from what we talked about in the seminar. So don't just ignore it. And don't forget, if you have not, if you skipped some stuff, you could make up for some of that, not everything, but unless maybe you only skipped one thing. But museum visit extra credit, the instructions are in the course. I may not have moved that down into this week's work. If I didn't, I'll fix that. But it is also up at the top of the course underneath the Zoom room. So take a look at what needs to be done there. Do it. It is due after the break on the 8th. Remember, if you are wanting to do the actual physical visiting of things, I would call ahead, make sure places are open, because hours kind of keep shifting around. And make sure too, if you're looking at going someplace that they, verify, oh, they charge an admission fee. What is that fee? Or they don't charge an admission fee. The one that I will tell you I know is free is the History Museum downtown. But again, their hours are severely constricted. They're usually constricted, and they're even more so now. So I strongly urge you to give them a call before you're wanting to go down there and just make sure somebody's going to be there to let you in. The History Museum is great, and they love having my students come down. They love that people are taking an interest. The Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, it didn't look like they're charging an entry fee, but do verify that. That's a great tour. The Russell, I know, has an entry fee. So be prepared. And it's, as I'm recalling, it's kind of up there. I mean, I think it's like $8 or something like that. So, but remember, the virtual ones are all free, I believe. So you can do those too. But just make sure you're looking at that instruction sheet so you know exactly what you need to be doing. And if you do go and physically visit museums, do be sure that you're behaving appropriately. Remember, you are representing Great Falls Public Schools, you are representing yourself, and that's important. You're also representing me. And if you do something to besmirch my good name, you don't get the extra credit. Just period. So definitely because you're representing me, but also because you're representing yourself. If you're going out of town and you're going to go somewhere that has a historical museum and you want to visit that, even though it's not on my sheet, that's fine. If you're going to Bozeman, by the way, one of the best museums I've ever visited is the American Computer Museum. And that is on the, I think it's like the south end of the MSU campus down there. It's really, really good. I would call ahead, but yeah, pound for pound, probably one of the best museums I've ever been to. So if you get the opportunity, they're fantastic. All right, any questions about any of that? I'm seeing there's something in the chat. Mine bit me in the butt when I lost access to my email for a few days and had to restart it. Yeah, so just chiming in on computer issues. Yeah, and make sure if you have something to say, I wouldn't put it in the chat just because I don't always look over there. So by all means, unmute yourselves and say your piece. But we are going to go ahead and get underway unless there are any questions about anything we just discussed.
Mr. Rosenley.
C. Yes.
One of the things like with the CNN quiz, it's actually one of the easiest quizzes because it's only 4 questions and then 1 easy question.
Oh yeah, one of them is a total giveaway. So yeah, I mean the fifth question is always bonehead. I mean, really, like this one, I think there's only one of them that's I ask for a number, and only one of the answers is a number. So yeah, I do stuff like that. It's, you know, I don't make it super hard. So anyway, all right, we're gonna move her on up here. So sticking with our theme of unfortunate things that we talk about in this class, we're going to talk about race relations at the turn of the 20th century, and we're going to talk about 3 sort of early, I guess you could call them civil rights leaders. But yeah, if you remember nothing else about race relations in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you can remember that they were bad. Okay, I mean, if we were going to simplify it out entirely, bad. Let's just go there. Dr. James Lowen, who was is the author of a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, has called this period, especially this goes into about the 1920s, and he calls that period of American history the nadir, or the low point of race relations in the United States. And that was certainly true between Black and white America, certainly true between white and Hispanic America, Native Americans, really to be non-white and actually non-Protestant in this country during this time was not a great time in America. If you were a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, your life was probably decent. If you were not, your life was considerably harder. This period included, in terms of race relations, especially between Black and white America, thousands of lynchings. Maybe tell me, what is a lynching? When I say lynching, does everybody know what I'm talking about?
It's a hanging.
Okay, a hanging, but what's the sort of the defining character? Because I mean, the state hangs people.
A mob gets together, grabs a person, and hangs him from the tree without any trial or anything.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, absolutely. No trial, no due process. This is mob type justice. Okay, and that was happening especially in the South, but really all over the country during this time period. Actually, there have been racially motivated lynchings. I think there was, the statistic that I read once was there was one every year in America into the 1990s. And then there have been some since. It's just not been every year. So yeah, it's a big deal. In addition, so after Reconstruction, you started to see Southern states reestablishing their rights. Basically, they were given the responsibility for securing civil rights and civil liberties. And they could do that any way they saw fit. And some of that included basically not doing that. And that's what are known as the Jim Crow laws. So you had things like very strict legal segregation. So this was in everything from parts of town where, you know, there were white parts of town and black parts of town, public transportation, first in streetcars and then in buses. You had part of the streetcar for white passengers and part for black passengers. Movies and theaters, the white patrons were seated on the you might call it the orchestra level, the main floor, and then black patrons were seated in the balcony. Was typically how that worked. So that was true for like live performances as well as movies. And that's actually where you get the term the peanut gallery. If you ever hear somebody refer to, oh, no comments from the peanut gallery, that was a phrase that was used to quiet down the balcony in segregated theaters. So peanut gallery is actually a very racist term. So you have this very strict segregation, separation of black and white. And this even went to like laws of courtesy. Like African Americans, if you were walking down the sidewalk and you encountered a white pedestrian, as an African American, you had to step off the sidewalk into the street to let a white person go by. You couldn't just walk side by side. You had to literally step off the sidewalk into the street. So that's the kind of segregation. And if you violated those segregation laws or those rules of courtesy, you could be beaten, you could be arrested, or you could be lynched. You also had limits
Think about
on.
Emmett Till.
Oh yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
good example.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, I mean there are a million of them. That's when we get into talking about the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, you will hear the example of like Rosa Parks, who violated that segregation by sitting in the white section of a bus. But that was absolutely not done at this time period. It was not even discussed. They were also limiting, so through Reconstruction and the first few years after Reconstruction, African Americans were still allowed to vote in many parts of the South. But slowly, Southern states started to limit that. And they did that through two things: literacy tests and poll taxes were the primary means that they did that. So, literacy tests, and this was oftentimes, so sometimes there would be a statewide literacy test. Sometimes county clerks were just allowed to put any document in front of a prospective voter. And if they couldn't read it, well, you weren't allowed to vote. So some county clerks would put something in French or in German or in some foreign language in front of somebody, and when they couldn't read it, oh, you can't vote. And they could decide who they wanted to give those tests to. And if they gave it to a white person and the white person didn't pass, they were allowed to basically overlook that. They were like, oh, and one of the ways they did that was something called the grandfather clause. So if your father or grandfather had been able to vote in, I think the year was 1867, I believe was when they passed the 14th Amendment. If your father or grandfather could vote when they passed the 14th Amendment, or right before they passed the 14th Amendment, then you were allowed to vote. That left all African Americans out. None of them were grandfathered in because at that point their fathers and grandfathers weren't allowed to vote because it was before they passed the 14th Amendment. The other thing was poll taxes. You had to pay a fee every year to be allowed to vote. And for a lot of African Americans, they were living, what we would think of today as paycheck to paycheck. And so your choice was, do I pay the fee to be able to vote, or do I buy food for my family? And most of them are going to go, yeah, I'm going to feed my family. So between those couple of things and then the use of the grandfather clause, African American voting went to almost nothing throughout certainly the South and even parts of the North. It was not a good time anywhere in the country. It was maybe a little better in the North, but we're not talking great deal better. So you have the resurgence, especially in the early part of the 20th century, of the Ku Klux Klan. The top right picture there is a Klan initiation, and you might think, oh, that was probably in Georgia or something like that. That was Long Island, New York. So, I mean, literally a stone's throw away from the metropolitan, progressive, enlightened capital of the world, really, New York City. Here are people being initiated into the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan sort of had a resurgence in the 19 teens, and by the time we get to the 1920s, there are like millions of members of the KKK. And then the picture on the bottom there, I can't tell if it's a Klan wedding or what. I do think that does have to be the worst wedding theme ever. Yeah. I wanted fantasy princess. Well, the costume shop only had Klan robes. And then on the left side, those are African Americans being rounded up during the Chicago race riots of 1921. By the way, I believe that picture was taken by one of the guys that we're going to talk about today, W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay, so we mentioned lynchings, and I'm going to apologize right now. Some of these pictures are a little graphic. So just to give you an idea, this was not something that always happened like in secret. They took pictures of these things, and oftentimes those pictures were sold. I believe all of the ones that I'm going to show you today ended up being sold as like postcards. I don't know who you would send that postcard to. But yeah, I mean, here's a picture of literally a guy being burned. And nobody in that crowd is like hiding their face going, oh my God, I can't believe we're here and someone's taking a picture. Nobody's saying, no pictures, no pictures. No, they're all like, yeah, we killed a guy. Woohoo. I mean, it just absolutely blows me away. I don't remember where this one was taken. This one, however, was again a postcard. This was Duluth, Minnesota. Okay, tater tot casserole, Lutheran church potluck, Minnesota. These guys were circus workers, and they were falsely accused, okay, of raping a white woman. Oftentimes, when a black person was accused of raping a white woman, it was just assumed that he was taking advantage of a white woman. Oftentimes didn't take into account the fact that women could say yes as well, and that often did happen. And that was certainly the case here. So these guys were literally, they were traveling circus workers, and they were in town, and there was a report of a rape, and a mob literally went and strung them up. There's two of them hanging, there's one on the ground. Again, Duluth, Minnesota. And you just go, wow. So this was a problem everywhere, not just the South. This was Oklahoma. And this was a picture, and you can kind of see on the one on the left, you can see the two bodies hanging, and then you can see more close-ups on the right. This was a mother and son, Laura and L.D. Nelson. The son was accused, again, no trial, was accused of killing a sheriff's deputy. And again, a mob went and dragged them out of their home and literally hanged them from this bridge. And then they took pictures, the entire mob there, and took pictures of them hanging. And again, these were sold as postcards. So yeah, this was not a good time to be not white in America. So 3 people that were important in sort of advancing rights for African Americans, and they really sort of exist on a spectrum here. The first one is Booker T. Washington. If you've heard of one of these guys, it's Booker T. Washington. Washington becomes probably the most prominent African American in the country. He was born into slavery, and then emancipation happened. I think he was around 10 or so when emancipation took place. And so he took that opportunity. He was able to get an education. He wrote books. He was an educator. He was a public speaker. He actually founded the Tuskegee Institute, that was known as the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. What Washington advocated was that African Americans needed to, for lack of a better term, kind of lay low. And just whatever happened, they needed to. And he wasn't a religious guy, like, I mean, he wasn't like Martin Luther King Jr., a reverend or anything like that. But his teachings were almost biblical, in that he kind of said, even if they beat you, even if they mistreat you, you shouldn't respond. You shouldn't lash back in violence. You let that happen. You allow that to happen. And eventually, white America is going to see that they need African Americans. They need blacks. That we are the ones that work their fields. We are the ones that make their products. We are the ones that do all of these things that they don't want to do. And eventually, and Washington said this could take 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, but eventually white America is going to grant us our due. And we are going to make progress by basically being faithful and good servants. That made him not universally liked amongst the black community. But he was probably the most prominent African American in the country. He advised at least 4 presidents. American presidents would seek his counsel about racial issues. When he died, Woodrow Wilson, who was, by the by, maybe the most racist president we've ever had, attended his funeral. That's a really big deal. That a president of the United States attended the funeral of a black man in the 19 teens. I mean, that's a really big thing. But yeah, basically he said we just need to accept what happens to us and not respond. And he also didn't believe that they, should be filing lawsuits and trying to force the issue. Just let it happen, and eventually, we will get what's coming to us. We will get our due. So I found a recording. This is from 1895. So if you have speakers, maybe turn them up a little bit. It's 1895. The recording ain't fantastic. But this is Booker T. Washington in probably his most famous speech that was called the Atlanta Compromise speech. And this is just the first little bit.
To President and gentlemen of the Board of Directors and citizens. 1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise seeking the material, civil, or moral welfare of this section can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success. I will convey to you, Mr. President and Directors, the sentiment of the masses of my race when I say that in no way have the value and manhood of the American Negro been more fittingly and generously recognized and by the managers of this magnificent exposition at every stage of its progress. It is a recognition that will do more to cement the friendship of the two races than any occurrence since the dawn of our freedom. Not only this, but the opportunity here afforded will awaken among us a new era of industrial progress. Ignorant and inexperienced, it is not strange that in the first years of our new life, we began at the top instead of the bottom. That a seat in Congress or the state legislature was more sought than real estate or industrial skill. That the political convention or some species had more attraction than starting a dairy farm or a truck garden. A ship lost at sea for many days suddenly sighted a friendly vessel. From the mast of the unfortunate vessel was seen a signal. Water, water, we die of thirst. The answer from the friendly vessel at once came back. Cast down your bucket where you are.
Yeah. So I think maybe not realizing that drinking salt water will make you very sick, but okay, whatever. You get what he was basically trying to say there. Second guy we're going to talk about, W.E.B. Du Bois. And I know those of you who study French who go, it's Dubois. No, he pronounced it Dubois, so we're going with that. Even though, yeah, in French pronunciation, it would be Dubois. So W.E.B. Du Bois was born after the end of slavery. And you might, if you read about this guy and you read about his relationship with Booker T. Washington, you might see somebody might mention the parallel. Well, Booker T. Washington was like Martin Luther King Jr., and W.E.B. Du Bois was like Malcolm X. You could say that. I don't think it's particularly true, because, well, you'll see. But in any case, Du Bois was about legal confrontation. So Du Bois felt that blacks and whites could live side by side, and he actually very much respected Booker T. Washington, but he differed from Booker T. Washington. He didn't think that African Americans should have to wait around for rights. Du Bois wanted to force the issue through legal confrontation. He was also born in the North. Booker T. Washington was born a slave in the South. So their perspectives were very, very different. Du Bois was the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard, which was a really big deal. He was one of the founders and the leader of something called the Niagara Movement, which was a group of African American activists that wanted equal rights for African Americans. They really opposed what Booker T. Washington was saying in that Atlanta Compromise, that they felt that really African Americans should be able to take on leadership roles. And so one of the ways that Washington saw that happening was through what he called the talented 10th, that about a tenth of the African American population, about 10%, was capable of being leaders, and they should be nurtured, and they should, instead of Booker T. Washington was all about, African Americans should train for industrial and labor type jobs. And Du Bois said, no, they should be educated just like white people, just like upper class white people are educated, so that they can be leaders, especially that talented 10th. It wasn't that Du Bois thought that all Black people should be educated that way. He saw the value in labor, but he also saw that that wasn't the path for everybody. So Du Bois was one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909, which fought for civil rights, oftentimes via court action. They filed lawsuits against the government to try and force those rights. He published a book called The Souls of Black Folk in 1903, and he was the founder of a magazine put out by the NAACP known as The Crisis. Du Bois actually attended the Versailles Peace Conference as a private citizen at the end of World War I, and attended at least two what were known as Pan-African Congresses, that one of them was taking place at the same time as the Versailles Conference, that was trying to unite all African descended people around the world. One of the issues at Versailles was what's going to happen to Africa. Was largely colonized, controlled by European powers, and the hope was at Versailles that these colonial powers were going to give these African nations their freedom. That didn't end up happening, but that was kind of the hope, and that was what Du Bois was there to push for. The only recording I found of Du Bois speaking was like a 35-minute speech when he was a lot older. So I just pulled a quote, and this was after he saw the aftermath of the lynching of a gentleman by the name of, I have it in my notes, Sam. Where is it? Oh, for goodness sakes. Oh, I had it in my notes. I can't find it. In any case, he witnessed the aftermath of this lynching in Atlanta, where parts of this guy's body were literally put on display in various places around the city. And he said one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were lynched, murdered, and starved. The cure wasn't simply telling people the truth, it was inducing them to act on the truth. Sam Hosed, there it is. Oh, for goodness sakes, it was on my screen the whole time. I'd lose my head if it weren't attached. And that was in 1899. Okay, the third guy, Marcus Garvey. Garvey is fascinating. Of these three guys, he's the most entertaining. Garvey was actually an immigrant to the United States. He was from Jamaica, thick Jamaican accent. But he like these other two guys, had a number of hats that he wore, literally and figuratively. He was an activist. He was a publisher, that should say publisher, entrepreneur, journalist, orator. He ran a line of ships, lots of stuff that he was involved in. And he and Du Bois were active in the Pan-African movement. So again, uniting all people of African descent. The difference was that whereas Du Bois thought that blacks and whites could function side by side and live side by side, Garvey didn't think that was true. Garvey felt that basically everybody needed to go back to their corners. And for African Americans, which was what Garvey professed to be a leader of, in fact, he declared himself to be the provisional president of Africa, which I think would have surprised the Africans. But in any case, what he felt was that African Americans and anyone of African descent needs to go back to Africa. And that needs to be where, that race of people is. It was Africa for the Africans, Europe for the Europeans. I don't know what he thought about America, if, the white people should go back to Europe. But that basically black people would only have power if they went back to Africa and be amongst their own people. And so in service of that agenda, he founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, and he published a newspaper called Negro World. He ran a shipping company, the Black Star Line. But yeah, he was trying to encourage people to go back to Africa. He was eventually, I believe, expelled from the United States. He did not end up going back to Africa, though. I think he ended up back in Jamaica. But fascinating guy. So I found a speech of Garvey's. I'm going to say, if you've been sitting there just listening to me and playing Fortnite or whatever, I would urge you to look at your screens at this point. The speech I'm going to play for you, or the clip, has the words there. He has a very thick Jamaican accent. If you don't read along, all you're going to hear, most of you, unless you're used to a Jamaican accent, is he talks really fast and very thick Jamaican. So again, I encourage you to actually look at the screen. The words are going to pop up.
Did not suffer and die to give me an education to slight, oppress, or discourage my people. Because whatsoever education I acquired out of their sacrifice of over 300 years, I shall use for the salvation of the 400 million black people of the world. And the day when I forsake my people, may God Almighty say there shall be no more life for you. I unequivocally rejected the racist assumption of much white American Christianity, namely that God had created the black man inferior and that he had intended Negroes to be a servant class, hewers of wood and drawers of water. Well, I predicated my view of man on the doctrine of Imago Dei. All men, regardless of color, are created in the image of God. Now, from this premise followed the equality of all men and the brotherhood of all men. The biblical injunction of Acts 17:26 reminds us that he created of one blood all nations of men that dwell on the face of the earth. I was most interested in brotherhood within his own race, because if Negroes are created in God's image and Negroes are black, then God must, in some sense, be black. If the white man has the idea of a white God, let him worship his God as he desires. We have found a new ideal, because whilst our God has no color, And yet it is human to see everything through one's own spectacles. And since the white people have seen their God through their white spectacles, we have only now started to see our God through our own spectacles. But we believe in the God of Ethiopia, the everlasting God, God of Father, God of Son, God of Holy Ghost, the one God of all ages. That is the God in whom we believe, but we shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia. For 250 years, we have struggled under the burden and rigors of slavery. We were maimed, we were brutalized, we were ravaged in every way. We are men. We have hopes, we have passions, we have feelings, we have desires just like any other race. The cry is raised all over the world of Canada for the Canadians, of America for the Americans, of England for the English, of France for the French, of Germany for the Germans. Do you think it unreasonable that we, the blacks of the world, should raise the cry of Africa for the Africans?
So we'll stop there, but you can see kind of where he was going with that. He was a very interesting guy. If you ever get a chance to read more about him, he really is very, very interesting. As is Du Bois. I think of the three, Booker T. Washington was probably the most boring of the three. Yeah, Garvey especially, really, really fascinating dude. So in this week's journal topic, I want you to describe the relationship between black and white America during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and then describe at least one of the three leaders that we discussed today, so Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, or Marcus Garvey, and what they believed to be the solution to racial problems. So just, a sentence on their basic gist. Not looking for a master's treatise, just give me a couple sentences total. All right. Any questions about anything we discussed in there?
Yes. So I've been to a town, I think it's near the Montana border in Idaho.
Okay.
And it's called Du Bois. Is that like named after this same Du Bois?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Are you sure it's not Boise?
No, it's Du Bois.
Yeah, I don't know the town. I would not think so, given that it's Idaho.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I mean, is it pronounced Du Bois?
I'm not sure. We just drove through it on a
yeah,
what do you call it?
I
car trip.
wouldn't think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. If there are no questions, I'm going to let you be free. If you have something you need to talk to me about, hang out and we'll talk about it. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. And then there were two. And then there was